Hello, welcome to part 2 of our Questions of Life session, looking at faith and whether faith can help us in the current situation that we find ourselves in. We're usually live at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, so you can join us then, but we're glad that you're watching this video. If you have any questions for us during the week or during the live stream, you can email us at qol@scbc.org. It's really interesting because you talk to the average person in the street, they would say that they're not particularly interested in Christianity. You talk to them about the Bible, well, that's just a boring old book. And you've talked about the fact that the Bible helps us to make sense of today, that what's happening isn't new, but has gone on for generations, and it's just a bit of a complete shock to us. And just the relevance of it and how the Bible speaks today and how there are prayers in it, and that you pray prayers. And I think people's perception of Christians is that we're quite weird, which is probably quite true.
I would be weird whether I was a Christian or not. Being a Christian's made no difference to
I think it's made you a bit weirder. But there is this perception that Christians are a little bit odd, and that Christianity is maybe something that controls your life, that it's about things that you can't do. It's not about enjoying life. It's not about freedom. It's about going to church. It's about rules and regulations. And yet you're talking about a Bible that makes sense of today, and you're talking about praying. Just unpack a little bit. Just explain, in a nutshell, what do you think, what is a Christian? Because we've got all of these ideas, and you've just come in and you've just moved the goalposts. What is a Christian?
I mean, we could spend the next 10 sessions trying to explain the intricacies, but essentially I think a Christian is fundamentally two things, I suppose. Firstly, is somebody who wants to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And that means, that's not that like you follow him on Facebook. It's not that you watch what he's doing. It's that you decide, I want to live the life that he had for me. He has for me. I want to follow him.
Yeah.
The Bible talks about being a disciple, that we're wanting to live a Christ-like life. We want to love our neighbor as ourselves. We want to be kind and compassionate and gracious and generous and merciful. So in the one sense, a Christian is someone who says, I want to live and follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Paradoxically, and at the same time, I think a Christian is someone who says, I can't do this without you, Jesus. I can't do this without your help. And I need you in my life. I need you to come into my life. And we believe that God comes in by his Spirit, by his Holy Spirit, and lives within and empowers and equips us. And that by asking Jesus to come into our life, asking him to help us, we find the strength and the power day by day to be that little bit more like Jesus than we were yesterday. We don't become perfect overnight. There's all kinds of stuff that we deal with and God deals with in our lives. But for me, a Christian is someone who wants to follow Jesus. And secondly, is someone who recognizes that they can't do it on their own, that they need him. Now, there's a whole third area. I always get the numbers wrong, but there's a whole third area about who Jesus was and what he was doing when he died and what his resurrection means that perhaps we'll unpack in future times. But essentially, a Christian is someone who says, I want to follow you, Jesus, and I need you in my life.
I think for me, I had quite an interesting upbringing. So my parents took me to church, and my brother from the time that we were born. And I went to church until I was about 13, and I never got it. I never understood what being a Christian was. The church was full of nice people. We had nice services. I made friends there. It was great, but it just never made sense to me. It was somewhere that I went on a Sunday. And so at the age of 13, I stopped going. And my life went downhill quite rapidly for quite a few years. And then it wasn't until I was just for my 18th birthday that someone actually explained to me what a Christian is, and the difference that this man Jesus can make in somebody's life. And for me, I'd never understood it. It'd always been about you read the Bible, you try and do good things, you go somewhere on a Sunday, but actually a relationship, actually somebody that is interested in my life, that can help me. And my life was in a very, I suppose, difficult and dark place at that time. I wasn't happy. I didn't really want to be on this earth. I was very happy to give up on everything. And in that moment, there was a sense of connection. There was a sense that my life suddenly had some meaning, it had some purpose, and the word that we use on X Factor, the journey began, if you like, and I began to understand who this Jesus is. And you talk about Jesus being part of your life and the difference that that makes. What would you say? So you became a Christian when you were how old?
Well, it's a process between 13 and 15.
Okay.
Yeah. I can remember when it started and I can remember when it ended.
Yeah.
So it was a journey, yeah. Yeah.
And what was one of the key reasons for that happening?
Yeah, so there were two big things for me. The beginning part was that I really grasped the reality of heaven. And I really realized that this life has got a lot of issues and a lot of problems and a lot of decay, really. And I understood the wonder and the beauty of heaven, and that God intended something better than this. And I wanted to go to heaven. It was as simple as that. And I understood.
Not literally then.
Not literally then, but
yeah.
I understood that I needed to make my peace with God, that I needed to have a relationship with Jesus. That there was no point heaven just repeating all the mess of this world. Some decisions needed to be made, and I made a decision. I want to be your follower.
Yeah.
I think the next 2 years I kind of grappled with trying to understand what that meant. And then when I was around about 15, I had a very profound experience where I understood that God loved me. And this whole thing about rules, a lot of people's perception of God comes through the Old Testament, comes through all kinds of misconceptions of church and everything. But when you discover Jesus and you realize what he is doing on the cross and how he treated people and how he's expressing his love, what happened for me was somebody explained to me why Jesus was dying.
Yeah.
And suddenly I felt this intense experience of knowing that God loved me. And that's what Jesus does. That's why it's not simply a faith in God, it's a faith in Jesus, that it's an understanding that Jesus reveals God to us. Now, not everybody has that kind of experience, and I've only probably ever had that kind of feeling experience once or twice in my life.
Yeah.
And I know some people worry that they never have it, and I don't think that matters at all. Some people's faith is very rational, some people's faith is very intuitive. We're all somewhere on that spectrum. But around about 15, I could understand that God loved me, and that Jesus had demonstrated that for me on the cross. That all the stuff in my life that I was ashamed of and felt bad about, and all the things I felt were not good enough, that Jesus took all of that and understood that, and that he loved me. So I wanted to follow Jesus, and then I understood that he loved me. So that was, for some people, that's a very quick process, but I think for lots of us, it's a journey.
Yeah. Yeah, journey of beginning to put it all together and work it through. And begin to work out, well, what do we think of this Jesus? What do we think of God as well?
Yeah.
Have there been times in your life when you have struggled with your faith? Maybe something's happened. Because I know for many people now that maybe don't have a faith, and those that do have a faith, what we're going through is quite challenging. You know, where is God in this? Have there been times in your life when you've questioned it, or it's been a struggle? How have you dealt with that?
All the time.
This is the minister of our church, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic.
I think that's reality.
Yeah.
I think there are times when, you know, I've lost people close to me. When you see something that's really unjust. And then there are times when you just feel that you've messed up, when I've messed up, this sense of failure and inadequacy. So those are the big key points of challenge. And I think that I'm glad that my faith is real, and that it embraces reality, and you let reality in on it, if that makes sense. How have I dealt with that? How have I coped with that? I think, partly what I was saying earlier, I think in prayer and expressing it to God and say, Lord, I don't know where you are. I don't know what you're doing. You read in the Bible lots of times where the people were angry with God. They expressed, my God, why have you forsaken me? And partly I find that comforting to know that that's a legitimate experience. But I find that actually expressing to God what I feel in that process of talking it out, writing it out, whatever it is, I find that God encounters me, I find a sense of reassurance. I've needed to deal with things rationally. And for me, I've got to an intellectual point where I'm pretty convinced that my existence cannot be accidental. That all the different things that make life possible, and I think we can look again at this in another week, but all the things that make the existence of our planet that is so finely tuned, and how we have become the kind of sentient beings that we are. I often talk about the woodpecker, how it is that a woodpecker can bang its head against a tree so many hundreds of times a minute and not experience brain damage, because a woodpecker has a brain that's held in a skull and a material that's different to any other being, any other creature in the whole universe, or the whole known world anyway. So nature convinces me intellectually that we have to be designed, that we cannot be a system of random events. There's too many far-fetched things. You know, if you came across a computer, you wouldn't say what explosion made that computer. You'd know somebody'd made it. And we are infinitely more complex than computers. So that bit rationally, I don't tend to intellectually doubt there's a God because of nature. What I do tend to do is worry about what he's doing. And I think being honest with him has helped me.
And you worry about what he thinks of you as well.
Yeah, and that's where coming back to Jesus and the cross really is profoundly important to me. And I've come to value the power of confession and just saying to God, Lord, I'm sorry, and realizing that that's what he's doing on the cross. That Jesus didn't come, he talks about it a lot, he says he didn't come for the healthy and the well and the successful and the brilliant people. He came for the poor and the vulnerable and the weak. And that actually knowing you're weak and knowing you're frail is actually a great way of knowing God. So, when I'm doubting that he loves me, it's just going back to Jesus and seeing there's no other reason why Jesus would die other than he's come to express his love.
There's a verse in the Bible that talks about Jesus coming for the harassed, that they were harassed like a sheep without a shepherd. And I love that, and I think that is often us as a human race. And I think particularly in the Western world, there's a lot of us that struggle with mental health. I've had and do have mental health issues. And it's interesting, you talking about, you know, this intellectual sense, knowing in your mind that God exists, and that certainty in your faith. I think that sometimes when we struggle with mental health, that can be slightly skewed. And I think for me, I'm quite an emotional person, and I find it difficult not to base everything on my emotions. So I have to work really, really hard, I think, when I feel distant from God, or God, where are you? What are you doing? It's like a double whammy, trying to work it out with my mind that may not be quite functioning as I want it to, and my emotions that are all over the shop. And I have to get to a point where I'm not basing this on my emotions. I'm going to go back to the Bible. And I'm going to go back to scriptures that remind me of the truth. That though I may be struggling to get it all in my head and all in my heart, I go back to this point, but I believe and I trust that God is good. I believe and trust that God is there. I may not feel it. My head may be a little bit scrambled. And so for those that are struggling with mental health, that's something that we would encourage. Anything else that you would say into that?
I think... in the last 3 or 4 weeks, one of the things that's happened for me is I've had times of great anxiety. I say great. What I feel is anxiety for me. It's probably under the surface and I can cope, but it feels very anxious for me. And one of the things that I found really quite powerful is that I've said to God, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I don't know if this is right. And invariably that day, I've had an email from somebody who's just randomly sent me an email that's just encouraged me or reaffirmed what I was thinking. So for me, it's just constantly God saying, will you speak to me? Will you show me something? And you can say, well, there are a load of coincidences that happen. But I've just found that God has reassured me at times. So there's part me being hanging strongly to what the Bible says, and there's part of me dealing with the fact that people are saying things at the right time for me to hear.
Yeah.
I also think, just in terms of my anxiety, I have to exercise. I have to walk the dog. I have to get outside. I have to go to bed at the right time and sleep for the right time and eat the right things. And my anxiety is far worse when I haven't slept properly, when I haven't exercised, when I haven't had fresh air. And also for me, trying to find things that help me to switch off.
Yeah.
One of the problems for me has been the real way I would have switched off is to watch football. I absolutely love football.
Well, it's a bit of an oxymoron for you, isn't it, switching off and loving football, because your football team is Cambridge United. You have the Moose next to you
Marvin
there.
the Moose.
Marvin the Moose. You support Cambridge, I support Watford. So neither of us have got particularly great teams, but that's just something that you do. It switches your mind off, just takes you away from everything that you're going through, and you get depressed about the football.
Yeah.
Most
Incidentally, I was watching the Sunderland Till I Die Netflix series.
Okay.
And there was a throwaway comment which I took very personally, and you might as well. There was one of the guys, and he said, "This is Sunderland. We're talking about them being. If you don't know, they got relegated. They're down in the league, the third tier. We're in the fourth tier. And he said, "This is Sunderland. This is Sunderland." He said, "We're not some Watford or Cambridge United."
Is that what they said? That was the direct quote.
We're not some Watford or Cambridge United.
Rude.
That's what I thought.